Right, so far when we've done Razor pages, it's been like this. We have our Razor page. That's connected to our model. And the model has variables declared in it. And also has a few methods on post, on get maybe, that fire up when the page is loaded, depending on exactly how the page is loaded. The idea is these fill up these variables, and these variables are used inside our Razor page to make things happen. So that's sort of a summary of what we've done so far in the first several weeks of class. Well, now we're gonna create a database component. All right, and here's how we're going to do it. We have our database over here. And we're going to have a set of classes over here that are also called model. I guess I would differentiate and call these page models, and these are entity models. And these classes, there will be not necessarily one-to-one, but there'll be things in the model that correspond to tables in the database. And these models have to be in sync with each other. Our code then is going to manipulate these models. And it's going to have variables for different collections of members of that model. When I say collection, I just mean a list of or a group of things. So if we're retrieving all the movies on a page, a collection would be a collection of movies. It would be an entity that has multiple movie objects in it. Now, we have to make sure these sync up. So there's two approaches you can take. I'll talk about the approach we're not going to do first, and then I'll talk about the approach that we are going to do. You could create the database and generate the entity models from the database. One way you could do it. Another way you could do it is you could create the entity models and generate the database from that. Those both directions. If these two things have to be in sync, you make one, you generate the other. We're going to do the approach where we're going to make the model first. So this is known as the model first approach. We're going to make our entity models in our application, and we'll use that to generate the database. So if we have any changes we want to make to the database, we're going to update the model first and then resync the database to the model. All right. So we're going to do everything in our model and we're going to sync up to our database. All right. So one thing you have to do for this week's assignment is you have to do this tutorial. And that's what we're going to do in class today. And I'm going to do it with some commentary as I'm doing it. I'm not just going to run through this. You should run through this. In fact, you need to do this as part of the assignment. But I'm going to point out the things that I think are most important. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a ASP.NET Razor page application. Excuse me. A new project. I'm going to pick a ASP.NET Core web app. This is what we've been doing all along. All right, so we're going to continue to do that. Project template for creating ASP.NET Core application with examples, example ASP.NET Razor pages. We click next. What is this going to be called? Well, we're going to give it a meaningful name. Please don't turn in assignments with the name Web Application 1. Give it a meaningful name. I'm going to call it Movie Tutorial. And I'm going to put it on the desktop. And we're going to put the solution and the project in the same folder. We do a next. What framework are we going to use? Use ASP.NET 6.0. Authentication, that deals with who can access the pages of the site. Do you have to be authenticated? And we're not going to do anything with that for now, so we're not going to do any authentication. The rest take the defaults. And it's going to go and create it. And it's going to create on my desktop. A folder containing the application that has all these subfolders under it, including the solution and so on. If we ran this, we would get the same thing that we've done in class before. And here we see we get our home page, privacy page, and that's about it. All right. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create our entity model. All right, for an entity. So I'm going to go right mouse on this and I'm going to create a folder. And a new folder, and I'm going to call that folder models. It's going to be a place for us to put all of our entity models. Then I'm going to right click and I'm going to say add. And I'm going to pick new item. And I'm going to add a new class. All right. And what should that class be called? It's going to represent movies in a movie database. So I'm going to call it by the singular and call the model movie. Okay. Click add and I have this class name movie. Now, in the interest of time, I'm not going to type this in. I'm going to go here and copy and paste the code from the tutorial. Tutorial covers things that I'm not, so please go through the tutorial. That is the expectation. I scroll past it. Yeah, here we go. I'm going to copy this in and I called it movie tutorial, so all right, let's look closer at what this is. This effectively is a definition of what is in a movie. What do we mean by a movie entity? What is contained in it? So this is a list of attributes. Public and ID. All right. And again, just like we see in C#, we have a get and set for it. So we can treat this just like a variable. Public string title. And the default for this is an empty string. Public date time, release date. Public string genre. Public decimal price. Now notice what we have here is what's called a data annotation. A data annotation is additional information about a given attribute. Specifically, although this is a date time field, we're only interested in the date for this. So this will handle it so that it will, even though there's a date time field being used, it will only use the date portion of it. We'll see more data annotations going forward in this example. But this is our model. Now you can very easily see how this could be turned into a database table, right? This will be turned into a database table called movie. The primary key is going to be ID. And those other things are going to be the attributes, and they'll have the proper type of data. So the strings will be strings, the dates will be dates, and so on down the line. Now, we haven't explicitly said this is the primary key, but the code is smart enough to know that if you have a field called ID, that's probably the primary key. So if you use a field like ID as the key, then it's going to figure out that you mean the key. In fact, it's going to make it an auto number key. All right. Whereas it will increment every time that you do create a new record. All right. So we can save that. Now, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to scaffold the movie model. Well, what does that mean, scaffold? Well, you probably have seen scaffolding in real life where, like, if there's construction or something, there'll be like this framework, like this sort of network of platforms and ladders and stuff that allow you to go up and down the building and do the repairs that you need to do or do whatever construction you're needing to do. So it's something used to sort of build upon. Use a scaffold to sort of build upon to make something. Well, what we're going to do is we're going to actually scaffold some very basic pages that will allow us to do what are called, these are not my terms, these are the standard terms, CRUD operations, C-R-U-D. And CRUD stands for create, retrieve, update, and delete. So the basic operations that you would need to perform on data on a table, right? You need to insert new rows. That's the create function. You need to be able to access the rows that are in the database. That's the retrieve function. You need to be able to change the values of fields. That's the update. And finally, you may need to delete stuff. That's the delete. So we're going to go here in our pages folder. We're going to scaffold some razor pages. We're going to make some razor pages that are pre-written to do very basic table operations. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to make a folder called pages. All right. That's the folder. And I'm going to go and add in that folder new scaffolded item. So what that's going to do is it's going to generate in my, oh, my mistake. That should not be pages. That should be movies. We're going to generate the basic pages needed to add, update, delete, and retrieve movies. Now notice that the model is called movies, movie, singular, and the pages, the folder for it is called movies, plural. That's a good convention to follow because on occasion, if the model is named the same thing as this folder, I've noticed there's been problems. So you want to avoid those problems, so make one singular, one plural. So I'm going to right mouse here, I'm going to say add new scaffolded item. Okay, what do I want? Well, I'm going to want razor pages using Entity Framework. Entity Framework is this whole scheme that I talked about before, where we're going to be using these models, these entity models, to perform database operations. So our program is going to access these models, and these models are tied to the database. So that whole process of creating a model, tying it to the database, is called the entity framework. So what we're doing here is we're going to create razor pages using entity framework CRUD, create, retrieve, update, and delete. Click add. It will now ask me what the name of the model class that I'm going to scaffold is. So I have to pick a model class. We only have one of them. So that is the movie class. Data context class. Hit the plus. I'm going to take the default, which is movie tutorial.data.movie tutorial context. And I'm going to click add. Wherever it says context, you can think of database. All right. This is where we're creating the database. And when we create a second model and we scaffold it, we're going to use the same data context class because that data context class ties to a database. And we're going to want all our tables to, for the most part, we're going to want all our tables to be in the same database. So our model class, our data context class, I got to it by hitting the plus and just accepting the default. I'm going to keep these defaults. I'm going to use a layout page. So in other words, my pages are going to use that layout _layout razor page to as the framework, as a template for creating this page or these pages. And I click add. It's going to do its thing. Don't complain about how long it takes because it's writing pages faster than you would write pages. I'll be grateful that it is writing the pages for you. Maybe you go get another cup of coffee, and when you're done, notice that in that Pages Movies folder, you have a create, a details, an edit, and a delete page. All right? Now, We're not ready to run yet. Why are we not ready to run yet? Because we have not done this syncing. We have, wish I could go up on the projector and put my hand over the database. We have everything on this side of the line. We have to generate that database. And the next couple of commands that I issue are going to generate that database. So we do that through NuGet Package Manager, Package Manager Console. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add a migration. A migration is all the changes that we made to the database since the last time we synced it. Last time we synced it up. So I'm going to say add dash migration space, and I'm going to give it a name that represents what stage of the database are we. And this is simply the initial creation. So I'm going to call it initial creation. Going to go do its thing. Gives me some messages, and ignore the warnings that it gives us. And we have a migration out there. We are now going to update our database after we've created the migration. So I'm going to type in update dash database. So it does its thing. It's actually creating the table and doing all that kind of stuff. And it actually creates for us a database with one movie table. We can see that if we want. If we go to View and select SQL Server Object Explorer, we can find under Local Databases our movie tutorial database that has tables in it. What tables does it have? It has its migration history, and most importantly, it has our DBO movies table. And notice how this corresponds to the model we created. There's the ID field. There's the ID field. It's an integer, and therefore it gets made the primary key. Look at the properties of it. Shows that it's an identity, which means that it's an auto number. Title, which is a string. Release date, which is a date. Genre, which is a string. And price, which is a decimal. So it has created our database table. All right. It corresponds to the movie. Now, I showed you how to find this database, but we're not going to make any changes to the database. If we decided, gee, we forgot a field or something like that, we would have to go through the process of adding it to the model, creating a new migration, and then updating the database. But I'm just showing you to demonstrate for purposes that how this works, how it syncs up and matches that. Now we could run it, but first we want to put it on our navigation. And for that, I'm going to go to my layout file. Copy this. And do /movies/index. It's in the subfolder off of pages called movies. And then I'll call that movies. So now when I run this, I have an option for movies. I click on that. I get an empty screen. This is my listing. It's retrieving the movies. All right, right now, there are no movies, so it shows me a list and it doesn't show anything. I click Create New. Notice I'm not able to create the ID because that's an auto number field that will get incremented automatically. So we can type in a movie, date that it was released, genre, and a price. And we can create it. And there it is saved in our database. So this is the index page, which is a listing. The listing has links to create a new member of this. We also can edit it. Display the details without being able to edit it. And if we want to, delete it. Now, notice that the edit and delete are two separate functions because, again, if we think in bigger terms, where you have someone whose responsibility is to maintain this database and you have other users that are visiting the site who aren't allowed to change anything but are allowed to view stuff, someone might be allowed to see data without being able to change it. So we've separated those two functions so that we can give permission for some people to do both, and we can give permission to some people to only be able to view the data. Now, by no means are these perfect, completed 100%, whatever you want to call it, pages. These are just the very bare bones rudimentary pages that are created, that are scaffolded for you. But it gives you a giant head start in creating your application. You don't have to create everything from scratch. You can go in and you can change the code if you want to. All right, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pretend I forgot a field. All right, let's say I forgot a field. Let's say I forgot a field for director. All right. There we have it. We added that in. So we've updated our model. What does that mean? That means that we have to update our database. So we have to resync those up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back to this, make sure the model's saved. And I could do one of two things if I wanted. Well, let's hold off on that. First thing I have to do is sync up the database. So how will I sync up the database? Well, I'll follow the same process I did before. I will go into my NuGet Package Manager, Management Console, and I'll add a migration. And it should be something that's understandable. So I'm going to say add director. So I look at this and I know this is a migration. If I need to look at this, I'll know that this is a migration that added the director. All right. And I could update the database again. It's going to go through and does its thing. Now, if we look at that database, under columns, there's the director. All right. Now, what if we go and run this page? Because we did the scaffolding before we added the director. Well, we're kind of out of luck with that because it doesn't know that we've added director and it's not going to automatically go and update these pages. Now, here's where we have two choices. If we've done anything to customize these pages, we would want to manually go in and add the director. If, however, we haven't done anything, we could just delete that folder and rescaffold the movie table. All right. But since I'm interested in teaching what goes on in these pages, we're going to take a look and we're going to manually update these pages. So we'll do that one step at a time. Let's look first of all at the index page. All right, here is our Razor page. Here's our model. Let's look and see what the model does. On get, what it's going to do is it's going to create a list from the movie table within our database. So remember, context roughly means our database. Our database, the movie table, is going to go and it's going to create a list. So therefore, we end up with an I list, which is like an array list if you've taken Java or C# or whatever. I think there's array lists in C#. But we have a list of movies in this variable called movie. And it is declared as a variable. Therefore, it can be used within the Razor page itself. Let's look at the Razor page. The Razor page does two things. It produces one table row that contains the headers, and then it loops through for every movie in the movie table. It loops through and displays the value of those items. those fields. So we can pretty much copy this. And as we're doing so, let's look at what it says. Display name for, in the model, what field? Movie sub-0, director. Remember, what's model mean? Means it's in the model. What is movie? Movie is that list of movies that we have in the model. We want for the 0th element, so the first element on that list, we want the display name for this field, the director field. And then we can go and do the same thing. Go in and create a column for it. And say, for each item in model movie, so it's looping through those, each one of them gets called item. We want that item's director. So now if we run this, and go to the movie, well, there's a spot for director, but no one has a value for director yet because we haven't updated the change, the edit program. So let's do that next. Let's look at the edit program. The edit program is a little more complex. Because this is editing a single movie, we have to pass on the query string the value of that movie, the ID of that movie. And then we look to see if we can find in that movie list, that movie database table, a movie that matches the ID that we got passed. And then we can bring that up. We'll look more at this next time. I do want to complete the edit though. So we'll kind of skip this for now and look at the page itself. So now when we go and run this, go into movies, edit it. Notice it says ID equals 1 on the end of this URL. And we have a spot for the director. And we can update it. And now it shows the director on the list. It does a lot of work for you. It generates pages for you. Don't use that as a crutch, though. It's important that you understand how those pages are generated and what the code on them mean, because I can guarantee there will be cause for you to go back later and make some edits to it. So it's important to understand how those work. And we'll probably spend a good amount of time next week looking at those pages in more detail and see how they work. Now, one thing if you'll notice, This price is supposed to be a numeric. What if we enter garbage in here? It automatically gives us an error message saying that the price must be a number. That again is scaffolded behavior that's built into the framework. We can put other validations in here to make sure that things are a certain number of characters, for example. So what is your job? Your job is to recreate what I did today. That is, go through the tutorial and create the movie model, scaffold it, and then update the pages to add a search that walks you through the steps for that, add a new field, and add validation. Once you've done that, add a second table to your application for actors and come up with the model, scaffold the pages, do the stuff that you did to the movie entity in this example. Are there any questions on this? This is important. Try to work through this as soon as you can. And make sure that you understand it. Make sure that you can go through, even if you have to go through the tutorial a couple times, make sure you could go through and do this from memory. All right, that's all I had for today. We will see you up in lab.